What if someone from your past showed up when you least expected them? Emily Carter lived a life built on calm routines. Soft music in the morning, black coffee at 7, emails by 9, and dinner alone at 8. Her small house in Portland was always quiet, always predictable. She liked it that way. After years of heartbreaks, she'd learned that silence was safer than surprises. But that night, life didn't ask before breaking her pattern. The clock showed 10:47 p.m. Rain drummed lightly against her window, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. She was half asleep on the couch, a book resting on her chest, when the front door creaked open. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. Then she heard footsteps, steady, confident, and achingly familiar. "Emily?" A man's voice called softly. Her heart froze. That voice, it had been years, but she knew it instantly. She turned slowly. There he stood, Daniel Reed, her father's best friend, the man who used to visit every summer when she was a teenager. The man who had once promised to come back for her graduation, but never did. For a moment, neither of them moved. The years seemed to vanish, and yet the silence between them was heavy with everything left unsaid. Daniel looked older now, his dark hair streaked with silver, faint lines near his eyes, but the same gentle look that once made her feel safe. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" He gave a small smile. "Your dad told me I could stay a few days. My conference got canceled and I was passing through town. I hope it's not a bad time." Emily's mind spun. Her father often talked about Daniel, but she never imagined he'd just show up, especially when her father wasn't home. He was away on a business trip, gone for another 2 days. "No, it's fine," she managed to say, though her heart hadn't caught up with her mouth. Daniel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Rainwater glistened on his jacket. "You've grown up," he said softly. "You look just like your mother." The compliment hit her unexpectedly, like a whisper from the past. Her mother had passed away when Emily was 16, and Daniel was one of the few who had been there, comforting her father and helping around the house. Back then, he had been her calm in the storm, kind, protective, someone she secretly admired. And now, standing in her living room again, he carried that same quiet warmth. "I'll make some tea," she said quickly, needing to escape the sudden rush of emotion. The kettle hissed. She watched the steam rise and tried not to think about how her heart had started beating faster the moment she saw him. When she returned to the living room, Daniel was standing near the old bookshelf, looking at framed pictures, her college graduation, her parents' wedding photo, her childhood drawings. "You kept this?" he said, pointing at a faded watercolor painting of a field under a golden sky. She nodded. "You taught me how to paint that. You said sunsets are proof that endings can still be beautiful." He smiled, eyes softening. "I still believe that." They sat down with tea. The rain outside had turned heavier, filling the room with a gentle hum. Conversation flowed, careful at first. Work, weather, how long it had been. She told him about her small art studio downtown, about how she sold paintings online now. He listened with genuine interest, nodding, asking questions, never interrupting. But under the calm words, Emily felt something stirring, a pull she couldn't explain. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe loneliness, or maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he was remembering someone he'd once known but never really forgotten. "You live alone?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "It's peaceful that way." He looked thoughtful. "Peaceful can be lonely sometimes." The words lingered between them longer than she expected. She didn't reply. She couldn't. He took another sip of tea, and for a moment, she saw the years on his face. Tired eyes, a life lived, stories untold. She wondered if he had ever married again after his wife passed. Her father never said. When the thunder cracked outside, the lights flickered. Emily jumped slightly. Daniel looked up. "Storm's getting closer." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup. "You still hate thunder?" he asked with a faint smile. She blinked. He remembered. "I guess some things never change." He chuckled softly. You used to hide under the table when it rained too hard. She laughed nervously. And you used to bring me chocolate milk to make me come out. His eyes warmed with memory. You never did drink it. You just smiled and told me stories until the thunder stopped. Silence followed. Soft, nostalgic, and heavy all at once. When the lights flickered again, Daniel stood. You should get some sleep. It's late. Emily nodded, though part of her wanted to keep talking. Guest room's down the hall. I'll get you some blankets, he thanked her. She handed him a folded quilt, the same one her mother had made years ago. Their hands brushed for a second, and the air seemed to shift. She looked up quickly, pretending not to notice. Good night, Emily, he said, his voice low and calm. Good night, Daniel. She went to her room, but sleep didn't come easily. The rain outside turned softer, like whispers against the glass. She kept thinking about how his eyes had looked, kind, tired, maybe a little sad. There was something different about him now. Something quieter, more thoughtful. She turned over, trying to ignore the warmth rising in her chest. It was ridiculous. He was her father's friend. He had known her since she was a child, but that didn't stop her heart from remembering the way he used to make her laugh, or how his words had always carried weight. The clock ticked past midnight. Emily finally sat up. The light from the hallway still glowed faintly under her door. Was he still awake? She slipped on her robe and stepped out quietly. The house felt different in the dark. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound louder. She walked to the kitchen, expecting to find it empty, but Daniel was there. He was standing near the window, the dim lamp casting a warm light on his face. He was holding something in his hand, a small photo frame. Her photo. It was from her high school graduation, the one where she was smiling awkwardly, holding flowers. Emily froze. He turned slowly, surprised. You're awake. I couldn't sleep, she said softly. Neither could you, apparently. He smiled faintly, putting the frame back on the shelf. Old habits. I never sleep well when it rains, she nodded, stepping closer. The rain shimmered behind him like silver threads, soft and endless. For a moment they just stood there, two people from different times, meeting again in the quiet space between storm and sunrise. You've done well for yourself, Emily, he said, his voice gentle. Your father's proud of you. He always talks about you. She smiled, though her throat tightened. He does? All the time. Says you're stronger than anyone he knows. She looked away, her eyes glistening slightly. I try. The silence stretched again, warm but fragile. She could feel the weight of every unsaid word in the air. The years they lost, the things they never talked about. She wanted to ask why he never came back, why he never wrote, but she didn't. Some truths were better left sleeping. Daniel finally sighed. You should rest. Tomorrow will be brighter. She nodded, even though her mind was far from calm. Good night, Daniel. Good night, he said softly. Emily walked back to her room, her heart beating too fast. She closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. What was happening? Why did everything feel so heavy yet alive? She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. Outside, lightning flashed faintly in the clouds, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen, remembered, but what she didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that Daniel hadn't gone to bed after she left. He stayed by the window, the photo frame still in his hand. He traced the edge of her smile with his thumb, quietly lost in thought. His eyes carried a softness she would never know, one that had begun years ago, when she was too young to understand, and he was too careful to ever say. The rain kept falling, slow and steady. And as the night deepened, one thing became certain. This visit wasn't just a coincidence. Daniel hadn't come to the house just to rest. There was something he hadn't said yet, something that would soon turn Emily's calm, predictable life upside down. In the dim glow of that midnight storm, Daniel whispered something to himself, words only the rain could hear, before turning off the lamp and walking down the hall toward her father's study, holding that photo close. Would you like me to continue with part 2, The Quiet Storm, in the same fast-paced cinematic tone, about 1,500 words too, with emotional tension and a new twist every minute? Why do old feelings return when you thought they'd died long ago? The morning. Light crept through thin curtains, painting soft gold across the kitchen walls. Emily woke to the sound of something sizzling, the gentle rhythm of a pan and the low hum of a man's voice. For a moment she forgot that Daniel was even there. Her house had been silent for so long that the sound of someone cooking felt almost unreal. She rubbed her eyes and walked toward the kitchen. Daniel stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, a towel tossed over his shoulder. The smell of pancakes filled the air, warm, sweet, nostalgic. For a second, it felt like stepping back in time. "You're up early," he said, glancing at her with that calm smile. "I could say the same," she replied. "You're making breakfast?" "Old habits," he said with a soft laugh. "Your dad still likes his pancakes with too much syrup, right?" She smiled faintly. "He does. You still remember." He turned off the stove and placed the plate on the table. "I remember a lot of things." They sat across from each other, steam curling from the pancakes. It was strange, sitting there with him after all these years. He poured coffee for her, just the way she liked, black, no sugar. He remembered that too. "So, your dad mentioned your art studio," he said, breaking the quiet. "How's that going?" "It's small, but it's mine," she said. "I paint, I sell, sometimes I teach. Keeps me sane." "That sounds like peace." She looked at him curiously. "You sound like you're searching for it." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I am." The air between them softened. Outside, rain from last night had left everything glistening, the kind of morning that makes you want to hold on to the silence a little longer. But Emily's mind wasn't silent. It was loud with questions. What was he really doing here? Why did her father not mention his visit sooner? Why did Daniel look at her like he wanted to say something but didn't know how? She pushed those thoughts away and stood. "I'll clean up." He shook his head. "Sit. I've got it." Watching him wash dishes felt oddly intimate. Every movement was calm, deliberate, the way people move when they've lived long enough to lose things. He looked older, yes, but there was something graceful about it. Like a man who had weathered storms and learned how to stand through them. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from her father. "Flight delayed. Back tomorrow night. Keep Daniel company." Emily's heart skipped. Tomorrow night. That meant another full day, just the two of them. "Bad news?" Daniel asked. "Dad's delayed. He'll be home tomorrow." He nodded, drying his hands. "Guess it's just us then." There was no reason that sentence should have made her heart race, but it did. Later, when she went to her studio, Daniel followed her, curious to see her work. The small room smelled of paint and turpentine, with sunlight spilling over unfinished canvases. He walked around quietly, studying each painting with care. "These are beautiful," he said finally. "You always had that spark." She smiled shyly. "You used to say that when I was 12. "You were 12 with a soul that saw color better than most adults," he replied. She laughed. "You always exaggerated." He shook his head. "Not about this." His voice was low, sincere. Emily felt her cheeks warm. She turned to a painting half-finished on the easel, a stormy sky, gray and gold. "I started this one months ago," she said. "Couldn't figure out how to finish it." He studied it for a long moment. "Maybe it's not missing color. Maybe it's missing closure." She looked at him, surprised. "Closure?" He met her gaze. "Sometimes art mirrors what we avoid." Maybe you stopped painting that sky because you weren't ready to see what happens after the storm." The words hit deeper than he probably meant. She looked away. "You sound like my therapist." He smiled gently. "Old people tend to talk like that." "You're not old," she said without thinking. Their eyes met again. Something shifted. Subtle, quiet, real. By afternoon, the sun faded behind clouds again. Emily made coffee, and Daniel sat by the window, reading an old magazine he'd found. For a while, the house felt peaceful, like the world outside didn't exist. Then came the drip, steady, slow, from the ceiling corner. She sighed. The same leak that had been haunting her every rainy week. "I'll fix it," Daniel said before she could protest. "You don't have to—" "Emily," he interrupted gently. "Let me." He found a ladder, some tools, and climbed up toward the ceiling. She watched him, half worried, half amused. "You really don't have to prove you're still handy," she teased. He chuckled. "Maybe I'm just trying to be useful." She smiled faintly, but didn't answer. The truth was, having him there, fixing things, making coffee, filling the silence, made her house feel alive again. When he climbed down, a drop of paint from the ceiling splashed on his shirt. She laughed softly. "You ruined your clothes." He looked at the stain, then at her. "It's just paint. Some marks are worth keeping." Her laughter faded slowly. There was a double meaning there, and she heard it. That evening, they ate together again. Simple soup and bread. Daniel told her stories about her father from their younger days, about the time they got lost on a road trip and ended up camping under the stars. She listened, smiling, imagining her dad young and carefree. "You two must have been close," she said softly. He nodded. "He's the brother I never had." "Then why did you disappear?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Daniel went quiet. For a long time, he didn't look at her. Then he sighed. "Life took me in a different direction. After my wife passed, I didn't know how to come back. Your dad tried to reach me, but I wasn't ready." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Don't be. We all run from something." The words sat heavy between them. She thought of her own life, how she'd run from love, from people, from the chance of being hurt again. Maybe they were more alike than she wanted to admit. When night came, she sat in her studio again, trying to finish that sky painting. Daniel had gone to his room, or so she thought. The air smelled of rain again, gentle and calm. She dipped her brush into blue paint and stared at the canvas, lost in thought. She didn't hear him come in. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly behind her. She turned. He stood at the door, wearing the same calm expression. "I wanted to finish this," she said. "Before the feeling fades." He stepped closer, looking at the painting. "You've captured something real. The sky looks alive." "Not yet," she whispered. "It still feels empty." He looked at her, then at the brush in her hand. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. Daniel dipped the brush gently, added a few strokes, light touches of gold along the horizon. "Every storm," he said quietly, "needs a little light to remind it that it'll end." Emily's eyes softened. "You still talk like a poet." He smiled. "I just talk like someone who's seen too many storms." They stood side by side, neither speaking. The painting now looked whole, the gray clouds fading into morning light. Something about it felt right, finished. She turned to thank him, but he was looking at her, not the painting. His gaze was deep, thoughtful, and full of something unspoken. "Daniel," she began, but her voice faltered. He blinked, looked away, and cleared his throat. "You should rest. It's late." She nodded, her chest tightening with something she couldn't name. He left quietly, but his presence lingered. She stared at the painting, the gold lines glowing faintly in the lamplight. It wasn't just art anymore. It was a memory sealed in color. Hours later, she went to check the studio one last time before bed. She thought he'd gone to sleep. But when she opened the door, Daniel was there, sitting in the chair, asleep. The lamp was still on, and the brush was still damp beside the palette. Her heart softened. He looked peaceful, younger somehow. The man who carried so much quiet sorrow now looked like someone who had finally found a little rest. She walked closer, careful not to wake him. On the easel beside him was her painting, now completely finished. The golden light had been extended across the sky, touching every corner. It looked alive. Hopeful. Emily smiled faintly. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much it meant that he remembered who she was when so many others had forgotten. But she didn't wake him. Instead, she quietly placed a blanket over his shoulders. And as she turned to leave, she noticed something on the table, a small folded piece of paper with her name written on it. Her heart began to race. She reached for it, hesitating. Before she could open the note, Daniel stirred in his sleep and whispered her name, softly, like a secret meant only for the night to hear. Have you ever felt time stop? Not because of fear, but because of feeling too much? The house was silent again. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, tapping lightly against the windows. Emily stood frozen beside Daniel, his voice still echoing in her mind. He had murmured her name in his sleep, so quietly, so naturally, like it was something he'd said 1,000 times before. For a long moment she didn't move. She just watched him, the rise and fall of his breathing steady, calm, the kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. She looked down at the folded note on the table. Her name written in his handwriting. She wanted to open it, but something stopped her. Maybe it was fear. Maybe curiosity. Maybe both. She slipped it into her pocket and walked back toward her room, but she didn't sleep. What happens when silence says more than words ever could? The night stretched endlessly. Emily sat on her bed, the note still in her hand. Every part of her wanted to unfold it, to know what Daniel had written. But part of her feared that once she did, everything would change. Finally, she opened it. The note was short, written in careful words. Emily, you remind me of everything good I once forgot. Thank you for letting me see color again. She read it twice, her chest tightening. The words weren't romantic, but they carried weight. The kind of emotion that came from someone who had seen too much darkness and finally found light again. She placed the note on her nightstand, her eyes stinging. Something inside her shifted that night, something she didn't have a name for. The next morning came quietly. Daniel was already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. The early sun glowed through the thin mist. Emily joined him, uncertain but drawn to the quiet comfort of his presence. Couldn't sleep again? She asked. He smiled faintly. Some habits don't change. She sipped her coffee and looked out at the garden. The air was cool and calm, the world washed clean by rain. Last night, he began, I didn't mean to worry you. You didn't, she said softly. You were dreaming. He looked at her curiously. Dreaming. You said my name. He froze, his eyes flickering with surprise. Then he smiled almost shyly. Did I? I must have been thinking about the painting. It was a lie. Gentle, careful, meant to protect her. But Emily knew it wasn't about the painting. She didn't press. She only nodded, though her heart thudded in her chest. They spent the morning fixing small things around the house. A loose cabinet door, a dripping faucet. The kind of chores that filled silence but didn't erase it. Every brush of his hand, every glance, carried something deeper now. When she reached for a screwdriver, their hands touched. Neither of them moved. Daniel pulled back first, clearing his throat. Sorry. It's okay, she whispered. The air felt heavy, too fragile to speak into. Can two people from different times feel the same ache? By noon, the clouds rolled back, and sunlight poured through the windows. Emily decided to go for a walk, needing air. Daniel offered to join her. They walked down the quiet neighborhood road, leaves crunching beneath their shoes. Do you ever wish life turned out differently? She asked suddenly. He thought for a moment. Sometimes, but I think everything happens for a reason, even the hard parts. She looked at him. What was your hardest part? He smiled sadly. Losing people I wasn't ready to lose. She nodded, her throat tightening. She didn't ask more. They reached a small park, empty, peaceful. The world felt smaller here, softer. Daniel sat on a bench and Emily sat beside him. You know, he said quietly, when I left years ago, I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to bring my sadness into your father's house. She turned to him. But you were family. We missed you. He looked down, hands clasped. I missed you too, more than I expected. The honesty in his tone made her heart skip. She didn't know what to say. After a moment, he stood. Come on, let's head back before it rains again. They walked home in silence, but every step carried something unspoken, the kind of silence that was louder than words. Back at the house, Emily went to her studio. The light hit her painting differently now, softer, brighter. She picked up a brush, but her hands shook. Daniel's words replayed in her mind. You remind me of everything good I once forgot. What did that mean? Why did it feel so personal, so heavy? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Daniel stood at the door, holding 2 mugs of tea. Truce, he said lightly. You paint. I sit quietly, she smiled. Deal. He sat by the window while she painted. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the sound of her brush and the faint ticking of the clock filled the room. Then Daniel said quietly, You know, you have your mother's hands. Gentle but stubborn. Emily stopped painting, surprised. You knew her well, he nodded. She used to say you'd grow into an artist who paints what people feel, not what they see. She was right. Her eyes softened. You remember everything. He smiled faintly. Some people are unforgettable, the words hung in the air. She looked at him, searching for the right thing to say, but nothing came. He stood after a while, stretching. I'll let you work. As he turned to leave, she said softly, Daniel, he paused. Thank you for coming back. He looked at her for a long moment, eyes full of something gentle, then nodded. I should have never stayed away this long. When he left, Emily stood still, her heart too full to move. Sometimes, what we run from is the same thing we hope to find again. That night the storm returned, louder this time. The wind howled, shaking the windows. Emily tried to sleep, but her thoughts were too loud. She gave up and went to the kitchen for water. Daniel was there again. He was sitting by the window watching the rain. His face looked thoughtful, distant. Can't sleep? He asked without turning. She shook her head. You either, he smiled faintly. Old habit. She sat across from him. The soft lamplight flickered, casting golden shadows between them. For a while, neither said anything. Do you ever wonder? She said finally. Why some people leave a mark even when they're gone for years? He looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. Because some bonds don't care about time. The words made her chest ache. Is that how you felt? She asked quietly. He hesitated. It's how I feel now. Silence again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, too delicate to touch. The thunder outside cracked sharply, and the lights flickered. Emily flinched. Daniel stood quickly. It's okay, he said gently, coming closer. The room went dark. Only lightning lit their faces for brief seconds. He reached out instinctively, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. For a long time, they stood there, 2 silhouettes surrounded by darkness, held together by something they didn't dare name. The storm raged outside, but inside, it was quiet, almost peaceful. I used to tell your father, Daniel whispered. that the hardest part of growing older isn't losing people. It's realizing how much you never said to them. Emily's heart trembled. Then say it. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the faint lightning. Some words aren't meant to be spoken, Emily. They're meant to be felt. She didn't reply. She couldn't. The lights flickered back on. The storm was still wild, but the silence between them was louder now, pulsing, alive. Daniel stepped back slowly, his jaw tight. You should sleep. Tomorrow your father will be back. Something in the way he said it made her stomach twist, like the words were heavier than they sounded. She wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already walking away. Good night, he said softly. Good night, she whispered back. When he was gone, Emily leaned against the counter, her heart racing. Something had changed between them. She didn't know what, but it scared her, and thrilled her all the same. She turned off the lamp and walked to her room. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Every sound carried memory, every shadow carried meaning. She sat on her bed, staring at the note again. Thank you for letting me see color again. It felt like a confession disguised as gratitude. She closed her eyes, the sound of rain filling her ears. And then she heard it. Faint footsteps in the hallway. She thought she imagined it, until a soft knock came at her door. Her breath caught. Emily, Daniel's voice said quietly. Can we talk? She opened the door halfway, heart pounding. But before she could say a word, he looked at her with eyes full of something raw, something unguarded, and whispered, There's something I should have told you years ago. Would you like me to continue part 4? The morning surprise, next, same tone and pacing, closing the story with emotional depth and a gentle cinematic ending? Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It frees you. The house was quiet except for the rain. Emily stood at her door, her hand frozen on the handle. Daniel's eyes met hers. Calm, deep, but filled with something that looked dangerously close to pain. He looked like a man who had carried a secret for far too long. The hallway light flickered softly, painting both their faces in pale gold. She swallowed hard. What is it, Daniel? He hesitated. The kind of pause that comes before a truth you can't take back. I should have told you years ago, he said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. Something about your father, about me. Emily's heart began to race. She stepped aside silently, letting him in. The room smelled faintly of rain and paint. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped, while Emily stood by the window, unsure if she was ready for what he was about to say. Can one secret change everything you thought you knew? Daniel exhaled deeply. After your mother passed, your father, he wasn't the same. He drowned himself in work, and I stayed close to help. At least that's what I told myself. But over time, I realized I wasn't just staying for him. Emily turned slowly. What do you mean? He looked at her, eyes heavy. I stayed because of you. Her heart stopped for a beat. Me? I watched you grow from a quiet, broken child into someone strong. Someone who still saw beauty in a world that took too much from her. You reminded me what hope looked like. She felt her breath catch. Daniel, I left, he continued softly, because I started feeling things I shouldn't. You were too young, and I was your father's friend. It wasn't right, so I stayed away. I thought time would make it fade, but it never did. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Emily didn't know what to say. 100 emotions flooded her at once. Shock, confusion, an ache she didn't want to name. You shouldn't have told me, she whispered, but her voice trembled. I know, he said, his tone steady, eyes calm but sad. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. You deserve the truth, even if it changes how you see me. She sat down slowly across from him. And what do you expect me to do with that truth? Nothing, he said simply. I just needed you to know. Sometimes love arrives too late to be understood. The rain outside grew louder, almost as if it was trying to drown the silence between them. Emily stared at the floor, the world spinning around her. She wasn't angry, just lost. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. I trusted you, she said softly, her voice breaking. You were part of my family. You were safe. I never wanted to stop being that, he said quickly. That's why I left, because I was afraid of ruining everything that was good between us. Her throat tightened. Then why come back now? He looked at her, eyes glistening. Because your father asked me to, and when I saw you again, I realized. I still cared. I thought I'd buried it, but some things don't die just because we want them to. Emily turned away, her reflection trembling faintly in the window glass. You shouldn't say these things, I know, he said again. But sometimes silence hurts more. She closed her eyes, the rain filling the room with sound. Every part of her wanted to forget this conversation, to rewind to the morning when he was just her father's friend fixing a leak and making pancakes. But the words had been spoken now, and they couldn't be taken back. Hours passed in heavy quiet. Daniel sat motionless, his gaze distant. Emily walked to the door and whispered, You should rest. My father will be home soon, he nodded. You're right. He stood to leave, but before he stepped out, he said one last thing, not looking back. I hope you never think badly of me, Emily. I never wanted to be anything more than someone who cared. The door closed softly behind him. Emily stood there long after he was gone, her heart torn between what she knew was right and what she felt. When dawn comes, it doesn't erase the night. It only shows what it left behind. Morning arrived quietly. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean and pale. Emily woke on the couch, the faint smell of coffee in the air again. For a moment, she thought it was just another morning, until she remembered. Her heart sank. She looked around, expecting to hear Daniel's calm hum from the kitchen. But the house was too quiet. She stood, walked toward the guest room, and found the bed neatly made. The jacket he'd left by the chair was gone. On the table sat a folded note and her finished painting, the storm sky now completely bathed in sunlight. Her hands trembled as she picked up the note. Emily, I couldn't stay. You deserve peace, not confusion. I came here to see an old friend and found the past waiting for me. Thank you for forgiving my silence, even if you never said it out loud. Tell your father the ceiling's fixed. Take care of yourself. D. She pressed the note to her chest, her eyes wet. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the gentleness in them. The quiet surrender of a man who knew love sometimes meant walking away. She looked at the painting again. The colors were perfect. Soft gold and blue, the sky clearing after a storm. Daniel had finished it for her. He'd completed what she couldn't. For a long time, she just stared at it, her breath uneven. Later that afternoon, her father returned. He came in with his usual cheer, bags in hand. Emily, I heard Daniel stopped by. Where's he? She forced a small smile. He left this morning, her father nodded. Ah, that sounds like him. Never stays long anywhere. He looked around, noticing the finished painting. He helped you with that, didn't he? Emily smiled faintly. He did. He always said you had talent. I'm glad he saw what you've become. Her chest tightened. Yeah, me too. Her father didn't notice the sadness in her tone. He talked about his trip, the people he met, the chaos of travel. Emily nodded, listening, smiling when needed. But her mind was somewhere else, on the porch, on the quiet goodbyes that had never been spoken. Sometimes closure doesn't come with answers. It comes with understanding. That evening, Emily sat by the window again, watching the last rays of sunlight fall over the wet garden. The note lay folded beside her. She read it one more time, then tucked it into her journal. Daniel was gone, but something about his visit had changed everything. She picked up her brush and faced a blank canvas. For the first time in years, she didn't hesitate. Her strokes were confident, full of life, full of light. She painted the same field she had painted as a child. But this time, she added a single figure standing far in the distance beneath a golden sky. A quiet smile touched her lips. She didn't need him to stay. She just needed to know that what she felt, what they both felt, had been real, even if unspoken. The past had found its voice, and now, finally, she could move forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the room filled with golden light. The air felt lighter, freer, peaceful. She whispered softly, "Goodbye, Daniel." And for a moment, she could almost hear his voice again, gentle, distant. "Thank you for letting me see color again." Emily closed her eyes, and the world fell into quiet. But just as the light faded completely, her phone buzzed on the table. A new message appeared from an unknown number. It was short. "Don't forget to look under the frame." Her eyes widened. She turned slowly toward the painting, the one Daniel had finished, hanging on the wall. The corner of the frame looked slightly loose. With trembling hands, she stood up and walked toward it. The screen faded to black.